Welcome to the Connected Enterprise podcast. This is Carl Lewis, your host from Vision 33, and my guest today is Bill Flynn from Catalyst Growth Advisors. Bill, welcome to the podcast, and start us off by just telling us a little bit about your journey and about Catalyst Growth Advisors.
Sure. Well, thank you for inviting me on, Carl. I really appreciate it. So my journey is sort of two arcs to my journey. I was a startup guy for about 25 years here in the Boston area. And that's why I talk really fast, in case you didn't notice. We all talk fast here in Boston. And I was 5 for 6 at one point, which is a phenomenal percentage. I've been through 2 IPOs and 7 acquisitions. It then became more reality. My last 4 were not very good. And that's when I switched to becoming a coach. Mostly I just sort of asked myself, do I want to do another startup? Which, to be honest with you, I love startups. I think it's a fun thing. I love puzzles. I love figuring stuff out, but I find it harder and harder to find a CEO or a founder that didn't suffer from what's called founderitis, which basically says they fall in love with their idea and not with the problem or the customer, and you're constantly challenged because you're not really doing anything that people want, but you think it's awesome. Yeah. So I became a coach about 5.5 years ago now. And I love it. I now know what a calling is. I knew what it was intellectually, but now I know what it is emotionally. I love what I do. Time flies when I'm doing it. And I'm more of a teacher than a coach. I certainly do some coaching, and I've always had a sort of Socratic approach to my leadership, if you will, anyway. So it was a nice fit for me. But I really teach people a growth framework. And that's sort of what's in my book, you know, that a snippet of the growth framework that I've come to believe is a really good one.
Boy, I forget. What's the title of the book?
Sure, it's Further, Faster, the Vital Few Steps That Take the Guesswork Out of Growth.
Very good. Well, you know, one of the things that intrigued me about speaking to you was that experience of the startups and that you like doing startups, and you sort of recognize, you know, there's things that, you know, there's some people that are cut out to do this startup stuff and some others that aren't, but maybe there is help. Right, for those that try and really aren't fit for it. Personally, I decided after a couple of failed attempts, maybe I learned faster than you did, or my early failure taught me faster, I think, that I wasn't really cut out for that. And I have great admiration for people that run their own businesses. Mm-hmm. My audience is chock full of men and women who are brave. And I mean, starting a business takes some courage.
Yeah, courage is a good word.
And so I have so much admiration for them because they have something that I don't have. And, but still, some of them, like you said, they had a great idea that worked initially, they're stuck and they're trying to take next steps, right?
Yep.
So my first question for you really is, you know, what does a young business need to do? And maybe they're not so young anymore, but what do they need to do to survive, given the fact that the vast majority of businesses actually fail?
Yeah. Well, that's a big question. So let's talk about the person who starts it, because I think they're the most critical piece more than anything. And what I've found is there are sort of 3 things that they need to have. And they all start with C, so that's kind of nice. They need to have curiosity, compassion, and what you just mentioned, courage. So those that has to be within them. Those have to be the traits that they come with, because starting a business is really hard. People are going to tell you it's wrong. You're going to run lots of obstacles. You're going to have to really believe in what you're doing. But you also have to compassion. You have to have compassion. And compassion, to me, the definition for me, which is the one I like the most, is compassion is empathy with action. Right? So you can be empathetic, and empathy is all over the business world today, right? I actually think we're missing the mark. Being empathetic is wonderful, and I think it's something you need. But empathy in and of itself is just says, hey, Carl, I totally feel what you feel, or here, this is what I thought I heard you say, and you say you totally get me, right? That's empathy. But it stops there. That's empathy. But if I don't then go to you and say, you know, oh, here's a book you might want to read, or can I ask you a few questions, or can I share something of mine that might help you? That's the action. And a founder needs to have both of those things, right? A leader has to have both of those things, I think, because people don't care what you do. They only care what you do does for them. And most leaders don't understand this. Most founders don't understand this. I remember I was with a founder a co-founder, I don't know, like 10, 12 years ago. And we did 3 sales calls over about a week. And I was asked to be a consultant. I'm a 8-time VP of sales and 2-time CMO and all that kind of stuff. So once in a while I help people. And he kept saying the same thing after each session because it didn't go well. He said, they just don't get it. And what I said to him after the 3rd one of those, I said, your sentence is perfect. Your pronouns are wrong. Yeah. They don't have to get it. You have to get them. And I think that's what founders need to be able to do. You have to get the customer. You have to fall in love with the problem instead of your idea. Because I've done 10 of these, and I'll tell you, Carl, only 1 was the original idea that actually turned into a business. They all morphed into something else because, Mike Tyson has a great saying, all planning is great until someone punches you in the face. And customers will punch you in the face when you ask them for money. When you don't ask them for money, they'll be super nice and kind and say, oh, Carl, that's a really good idea. I think it's wonderful. It's terrific. And then you say, okay, would you pay me? Can you write me a check? Well, I'm not really ready yet. We've got some other things going on in the business. I'll get back to you, right? That's them saying no. I love what you're doing, but I don't value what you're doing. If I valued it, I would pay you for it. So I think those are the things that, at least at the beginning, a founder needs to have. And then I'll add one thing is, if you're a leader, I'm a bit of I describe myself as an iconoclast. I do think I am. I do get into arguments and I piss people off every now and again because I don't really go for conventional wisdom. And conventional wisdom says, if you want to be a leader, you have to be humble and curious, and you have to have integrity, and you have charisma. You have to have all these attributes. And that just isn't true. There's no such thing as leadership from a recipe perspective. All leaders are different. Steve Jobs is considered one of the best leaders in the world ever. He had no integrity. He bought a car every 6 months so he could keep the handicap thing on so he get a better space. The guy had how many billions of dollars? That's not integrity. Charisma, Warren Buffett is not the most charismatic person on the planet. So it's nice to have those things, but I don't think you need them to be a leader. I think you need 2 things to be a leader. And there's only one thing that actually all leaders have. They all have followers. So I think we should study followership, not leadership. Leadership is amorphous and subjective. Followership is not. If we could figure out why people follow other people, we could actually be very good leaders. Now, we could do it for ill reasons, right? Some are populist and they sort of say things that people want to hear and people will follow them. But then eventually the shine goes off of that. But in order to create followers, you have to tell them where you're going. So I'm a big fan of vision, right? I'm a big fan of tell them where we're going or what you're all about. Give them something to follow. And then the other thing is what you mentioned, they all have courage. I think the only trait that all of them have is courage, because whether it's, defending their vision or sticking through something, or the courage to give autonomy to others so they can help them get there, I think courage is the only trait that you have to have as a leader. All the other ones are, I think, are optional.
Yeah, it reminds me of a couple of things I've heard in my lifetime. One is just, make the most of what you have, right? Yeah. If you want to start your own company, your own business, you are what you are. Make the most of it, right? Yeah. And if you've got the chutzpah, the courage to do it, you've got 100% of what you actually need. You just got to learn to make the most of it. The other one is that I'm a really big believer in leadership emergence. Now, a lot of times when people are looking to recruit leaders, they're really not looking to recruit a leader. They're looking to recruit a good follower. And I would want, if I'm looking for a leader in my own business, if I was to do that again, I would look out at all the staff people, all the followers that are there, and I'd pick the one that's leading that group, right? Really pick a leader. Don't pick somebody who's just going to do what you say what you do all the time, but pick a leader, somebody who will challenge you, right? So, and that leads me to my second question for you. One of the things I've noticed, and I've worked like you, I'm old enough, I've worked for a lot of different companies. I finally managed to find one where I could be there a decade plus and have no intention of leaving, right? I'm kind of headed towards the finish line. This is a great thing. But I probably worked at 17, 18 companies through my overall career.
Wow.
And a lot of leaders have a really difficult time getting out of their own way, right? How do they do that?
Well, so getting out of your own way is an interesting phrase. And I don't think there's an issue of getting out of your own way to be a leader. I think you have to get out of their way more than anything. Your job as a leader is not to do the thing that you're leading, unless you're in a small company, right? I mean, there's degrees, right?
Yep.
But the larger the company is, the less you should be doing day to day. The more you should be thinking about, how can I help my team become a better team? How can I make sure that we're optimizing all of the assets that we have on this team? You should be thinking about the team. Bill Campbell, who's called the $1 trillion coach, he coached Steve Jobs and Eric Schmidt and Sergey Brin, and tons of Silicon Valley leaders. And that's why they were worth more than trillions of dollars. He says team is first, and I totally agree with him. He's no longer with us, unfortunately. But team is first. If you're gonna be a leader, you're leading a team, and you have to think about the team. Do I have the right team? Are we positioned well to do whatever our function is that's helping the company become better? Right? There's a great book by Stanley McChrystal called Team of Teams, and that's really, if you're a CEO or a leader, the ultimate leader, the head of the company, you're leading a team of teams, and your job is to teach people how to run really good teams, right? Attract the right people, put them in the right places. We often try to fix people to fit what our idea of the thing is, instead of trying to figure out what they're all about and trying to use their best assets, their strengths to get what the function is, an optimal version of the function. I'm a huge fan of Marcus Buckingham and people like that, and he's all about strengths, and I think strengths is key, because people are idiosyncratic. We are not well-rounded. We are good at a few things, and our job as a leader is to figure out what are the few things that our team members are good at, and try to shape that so it gets us what our outcome is. Sometimes they're not a good fit for the team, and that's part of the situation. You have to move them to another team or maybe out of the company if they don't fit. But the best teams put together different people, and I know people won't like this, but I'm from New England, and I think one of the best coaches in the world for making really good teams is Bill Belichick, right? Now, he had a great leader in Tom Brady. We'll see if he can do it again. That combination really worked, but he was all about, it's about the team. And if you started talking about yourself and your accolades, he got rid of you. He fired you on a regular basis, right? So I think doing that, and that's all of the first almost, I'd say more than a third of my book is about team, because performance is a team sport. We got to do more of that. We don't do enough of that. We try to fix individuals, and we should try to really craft teams.
Yeah, I agree. And I think even it goes down to a lot of our compensation, programs and things in businesses are focused on high performance individuals as opposed to high performance teams. Yep. And so it doesn't really promote teamwork. It promotes being a loner, right? In that sense. Totally. Yeah.
There's a great story about the Ohio State Buckeyes, who for the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s were an awesome football team in one of the hardest conferences in the country. And then they started to trail off, and this guy Jim Tressel took over, I think, in the 90s. And he found that the team was not a team. They were all a bunch of individual performers. They were just about their own accolades, etc. And he equated it to I don't know how much you follow football, but they have these little things on their helmets for the Ohio State Buckeyes, and it's actually a Buckeye, right? Yep. They have a Buckeye, and you got it when you did something great for yourself, And he said, "I'm not doing that anymore. I'm going to give Buckeyes for the unit." When the unit made a sack, when the unit had a great play or a touchdown, and he turned that team back into a team, and they have won the national championship twice in an extremely competitive world, right? With the Alabamas and SMUs and et cetera. And they've been in the top 5 almost every year since he took over. And except for one season or two, when one guy came in, then Urban Meyer came in and is doing the same thing. He turned the compensation plan into a team plan, and it made a huge difference. So I agree with you. That's a good example.
To the demise of my Oregon Ducks a few years ago.
No, sorry.
Very good football team.
At least you're not from Michigan.
Well, I remember when Michigan was right up there too. So It cycles around. But that's interesting. So mean, it's really all about people and how they fit into the team and building the team. How do you go about recruiting people that really make you a stronger team? And, you talked a little bit about, finding the right role for people and doing what they really do well. I've been fortunate to work in a company where, the things that I do well, I'm encouraged to focus on, like talking to folks like you, sharing things with customers, visiting customers, being with people, because I kind of have that sort of empathy and compassion. I'm not going to just listen to the story. I'm going to go back to the office and say, hey, we need to do thus and so for this customer, right? I want to turn it into something. But how do you recruit people to fill, roles that are really going to make you a better team?
Yeah, so I think you have to step back first before you recruit anybody, and you have to understand what is the ultimate function and measurement of this team. How do we know when this team is successful? And then if you can break that down into its component parts. So for instance, let's just take marketing, right? Because it's super easy. Marketing, the main job of marketing in almost every company is to make sales easier. That's really the job of marketing. Now, how do you make sales? How do you know when you make sales easier? You make sales easier. There's one metric, which I like the most, which is you have provided qualified leads to your sales team. And then you can decide what a qualified lead is. But, that's a sort of a discussion and debate. And what you need to do is you need to provide enough that supports their ability to make the number, right? And not only just the top line number. I'm a big fan of cash. It also has to be profitable customers. So there really are qualified. These are the best. We're trying to provide you the best possible customers that not only can you close, but will be delighted to work with us. So once you do that, then you say, okay, how do we do that, right? What are the key functions underneath? And this is in my book as well, is I think there are 4 main functions right under marketing that sit right under marketing. And that's product marketing, which is basically figuring out, is this a problem we're solving? Does the market want it? How big is the market? That, sort of guesses that line. And then you sort of say, okay, then you have to create some sort of product management where you create the environment to make that product. Then you ask someone to make it. Say your software, so you've got product management that sets up the specs, and then you got product development, which are engineers, they write code, etc. And then you need someone to generate demand. Those are the 4 things I think that sit under marketing. Now, if you just take demand generation, there are a bunch of things that sit underneath that, right? There's awareness, and there's interest generation, there's qualification. So if you break it down in all those pieces, then you say, okay, now that we know how this works, who do we hire? And you look at them and say, you know what, the guy who's probably really good at interest generation, and qualification is probably a process person, right? They're good at process, and they're good at asking questions, and they're curious and empathetic. So that person might be able to do both jobs if we're too small. But I wouldn't want that person to be doing the creative work, right? Because that's not the way their brain works. I'm not a creative person. I'm a process guy, right? So that's probably why I was good at sales. I wasn't good at coming up with new ideas. I could recognize them when I heard them, but I couldn't come up with them. So you don't want me being the brainstorming guy, the guy that's trying to go out in the market and figure all this stuff out, because I might not be the right fit, and I probably won't like it either, because I'll be very uncomfortable. So that's what you need to do. I think you need to step back, figure out. There's something that I teach called the key function flow map, which tracks how we make money and has those key functions in it. Most companies have between 8 and 12 functions that run the business, sales, marketing, IT, HR, finance, operations, whatever. But 4, you really drive the business most of the time. And that's marketing, sales, operations, and finance. You got to come up with the ideas, spend the money to get them in. You got to close them. You got to deliver or implement, and you got to collect the money. Understanding those 4 things are really important, I think. If you can do that really well and craft those teams, you're well on your way to running a healthy company.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, recruitment these days is a pretty big challenge. I think if you can believe it, our company has a open headcount of approaching 100 people we're trying to recruit.
Yeah.
And it is a massive challenge in today's marketplace. And it's highly competitive, but you can't just hire anybody. They still have to be qualified for the role, and, to make a contribution that's worth the endeavor.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've seen a lot is that, not as we talked about, I think pretty much anybody can be an owner. Anybody can start a business if they really have the courage.
Especially these days.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. There's a lot of opportunities. But once you're there, you quickly sort of discover, if you're honest in that role with yourself, what your deficiencies are, right? So I wonder, in your travels, in your experience, the companies you're working with, what's kind of the most common mistake that an owner makes who is failing?
Uh, so what I've researched is there's not a common mistake. There's a ton of different ways to go out of business, Carl.
Yeah.
If I had to pick one, I would probably say, so what I've found is most businesses die or suffer from indigestion, not starvation. They try to do too many things. They're not good enough at each of them. They don't delight their customer. The best businesses are super simple, right? Nest makes really good thermometers, right? And Southwest sells to one particular kind of customer. They do it really well. They have one plane. Simple businesses usually endure, and they can have lots of moving parts, but you have to be able to figure out how to simplify the business. Now, Apple is actually a super simple business. Even though they have tons of products, everything they do is amazingly simple and simply amazing. If it doesn't meet that criteria, we're not doing it. And having those guidelines, putting those, I like to bowl every now and again. And if you bowl with your kids or your grandkids, right, they have those things that stick up on the side so it doesn't go in the gutter. That's your job as a leader. Tell them where the sides are. You can do anything you want in here, whatever you want. But this is where we play. If you go outside of here, one, if you think it's important and you're passionate about it, then let's talk about it. Maybe I set the guidelines too narrow. But most of the time we're going to say, don't do that. Or if you do it, I'll correct you. If you do it twice, you're done. So I think leaders try to do too much. And we don't go deep enough first. We try to go wide because we're chasing revenue, right? And revenue is vanity, right? Revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king. If you want to have a business that's healthy and thriving with people who are happy, then you're paying them well. You're not stressed out about having to make a payroll on a regular basis. So focus on cash to drive a business. And that means simplifying the business so you're really making as much profit per client as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an old saying from someone that a lot of people know, his name, Billy Graham. Somebody asked him one time, he said, Mr. Graham, every place you go, you basically say the same thing the same way every time. Don't you get bored with that? And he said, well, number one, it's been working, but it's basically this one thing I do, not these 40 I dabble in, right? And I think that would be a good thing for a lot of, like you said, go deep, right? Yeah. Remember the thing that got you here. What you're doing well, do it better. Before you start spreading out, adding product lines, doing all these other things, do what you do really well. Get the most out of it. That's a smart thing to do.
Exactly. I agree with Mr. Graham. It's not boring because when you see the look on the face of the people and you see the joy that you're bringing to someone else, man, that really motivates you. We are tribal beings, right? We want to work as teams. If you don't like that, if that doesn't drive you, I don't think you should run a team. Yeah. You should let someone else do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And there are people like that.
Sometimes I think that's the solution for some owners. Maybe I'm not good at running the team. I should bring somebody in who can run the team.
Yeah. Howard Schultz did that at Starbucks. Yeah. He knew that he was too hard a driver. He was too much of a hard ass, and he pissed people off. So he stuck someone in between him and everyone else. Yeah. Smart guy, right? Knows his limitations.
I can't remember the author, but there was one author who sort of talked about Mr. Inside and Mr. Outside. If you were a sales guy, and you decided to start your own business, you're Mr. Outside, right? But if you were an accountant and you decided to start your own business, you're Mr. Inside. Well, whichever one you are, don't try to do the other job because you probably won't be good at that. Find somebody else to do that role for you. I think that's really good advice.
Unless you hate the job you're doing.
Yeah. Having worked for somebody who was an accountant who forced himself to be a salesperson every day, I could see the angst that they went through all the time, and they could do the job, but it wasn't enjoyable. And I think that rubbed off on other people, that they interfaced with in the company. So I've done a little reading about you. I want to return to that cash issue, and after this little conversation,
Sure.
Done a little reading about Catalyst Growth Advisors, and you have this phrase 3+ leadership. What is that?
Oh, 3+ leadership. So I only work with teams that have 3 leaders or more on the leadership team. And to me, a leadership team isn't necessarily who reports to the CEO. It's who the CEO or the head of the company wants around him or her, that makes him or her better, that, as you said, challenges him or her, is, and feels safe enough to be able to do that. When you have 2, then typically the leader wins, right? Because there's a power dynamic that's going on. And the other person is always in a 1-down position. But when you have 3, it changes the dynamic. You can now sort of, and this is said poorly, but you can sort of gang up on the leader, right? And you can say, let me support Carl on that, Mr. Leader. Here's why I think it's a good idea. And often it changes the balance. Now, by the way, I have never had any leadership team that has had fewer than 5 on it. But that's my criteria, because it's, if the head of the company always wins, then very likely it's not going to be a healthy and thriving environment. And the things that I'm teaching them aren't going to be optimized.
Sounds like an opportunity for personal counseling, if that's the case. Maybe.
Yeah. I'll let someone else do that. I can hire someone else.
Exactly. That requires a whole different degree. So yeah, I would agree with you for sure. It's interesting. The friend of mine many years ago used to talk about, if all you have is plan A, and plan A goes to the toilet, what are you going to do? There's no plan B. You need opinions around you about, well, if that doesn't work, we should do this. Right. Yeah. And so I think I was just curious about that 3+, and it makes perfect sense. That you have, and again, hopefully they, they're not all family members getting a paycheck. So that somebody will disagree with the boss, right? On occasion. So talk to me about, you talked about, chasing revenue is not always a great idea, but if you want to make people happy, focus on cash. So why is, people talk about cash is king. Why is cash king?
Yeah. Well, I don't know that cash will make them happy, but it certainly increases the chances. Why? Because people want to be paid what they're worth. And if you're going to grow a business, if you want to have a lifestyle business and you're okay with that, then you still need cash, because we've learned, like in the last 21 years, we've had 3 economic crises, massive economic crises. We've had 9/11, we've had 2008, and then we have COVID. Those people who didn't have enough cash to survive, unless they were lucky to get the PPP loan, which, by the way, has never happened in my lifetime and probably will never happen again, then they went out of business. And even some of them who got access to it still went out of business. So you have to have enough cash to survive. Now, COVID is a crazy thing, and who knows if something that's happened again. But every 6 to 8 years, something happens. You can look back. If you just look back, every 6 to 8 years, something happens. You go back to 1973, it was a gas crisis, and you've got other things going on in the world. So cash is your primary financial growth metric. Why? Because cash, it costs money to grow, and it costs money to grow in front of the growth. So when I work with my clients, I say, okay, let's put together a plan. And of course, revenue's in the plan and profit, but cash is in the plan, because I say, oh, great. We think if we do these things over the next 2 or 3 years, that we will be as successful as we could be in that time frame. We still probably have longer to go, but in this time frame, we think this is realistic, it's achievable. And I say, great, how much will that cost you? How many people do you need to hire? What software tools do you need? You have to buy a factory, whatever it is. Okay, now let's create an actual revenue plan and a profit plan that drives the cash to pay for that. Because if you don't, then don't hire the people, don't bring on the factory, right? And don't use revenue like, oh, we did the revenue, so we should be fine. But you could do revenue and still come out with 0 cash, right? You give away things, or it costs you so much money to support it, it's sucking up the profit for your business. So that's why cash is a primary financial growth metric. And by the way, I'm a 30-year sales guy saying this. I'm all about revenue, right? So I got paid on revenue, but I should have been paid on gross margin.
Yeah, I've heard that conversation many times. Yeah, you mentioned those 3 key dates, right? 9/11, 2008, pandemic. My whole learning experience of starting a business and realizing I probably wasn't cut out for it all had to do with cash. because just before 2000, before 9/11, I basically started a business without enough cash. 9/11 happened, and that was the death knell, right? Because I just was no way we could keep up. People wouldn't pay their bills. There was just all kinds of, dynamics that go into that kind of a bad experience. And then basically my next opportunity, now I'll call myself a one-time good learner, because the second opportunity came around, right around 2008. And instead of going through that again, because the one thing I lacked was the cash, right? Was that when somebody basically turned a company over to me, said, it's yours, just keep going. I said, no, I can't do that. That's when I basically arranged for the company to be acquired by Vision 33, whom I work for today, because I recognize that it takes a lot of cash to survive a time like this. Yes. And it was really, just that learning experience. So when you work with somebody with a great idea, but they've got a business going, but they don't have enough cash, what do you tell them to do to change, to kind of reposition themselves to being in a better cash spot if they want to truly survive?
Yeah. So if we're talking about a startup, meaning, so a startup to me is different than a real business. A startup is not a real business to me. A startup is a temporary organization in search of a business model. If you find a business model, then you're probably a real company. You have some repeatability, scalability, et cetera. So they're two completely different entities. We are talking, apples and France here, right? Just completely different. Not even fruit. It's just completely different animals. So when I speak to founders, I say, unless it's a high cost business to start, and here in Boston, most of the people I talk to are software guys, so it's really low cost. Yeah. I say, don't spend any money. Go and spend time with who you think your customer is, and ask them if they even care. Ask them if they have this problem. Ask them how they're solving this problem today. Ask them how much it's costing them in time and resource and money to solve this problem. Get all that really good information, and then say, okay, now that we sort of understand the problem, how would we approach this? How would we make this happen? And there's a really good story about Airbnb. That's I think it's in the book, but I heard it from, I think it was Brian Chesky, who's one of the founders, or Joe Gibby. I can't remember. He was on something. And Airbnb's first business wasn't Airbnb. It was they made cushions. They made seat cushions for comfort, for sitting outside. And they actually still sell some, I guess. Once in a while, they get an order, and one of them goes in the garage and packages it up and ships it out. But when they were doing Airbnb, it was because they ran out of money with their other business, and they said, well, we need money, because they were trying to figure out what to do. And they had a conference coming to town. They were in San Francisco, and all the hotels were sold out. And they said, what if we just rented out an air mattress? That's how it's called, Airbnb, right? It's an air mattress that would be in the middle of the living room. And they said, we'd do that, but we'd also make sure that we took care of them, and we showed them around the city, et cetera. And someone bought it, like $80 a day or something like that. They did that. So they made a little money, like, wow, there's something here. And then they did that. And they had a couple other conferences, and they had other things, and they had other people doing it, but it wasn't really working very well. And then they got into, I think it was Idea Lab. And the guy who runs Idea Lab said, well, where are your customers? Where are the ones that are actually using your product, et cetera? They said, well, most of them are in New York, and Idea Lab is in California. The guy said, get out of here. Go fly to New York and talk to them. So I think it was Brian, who was a RISD, Rhode Island School of Design graduate. And so he had some chops and creativity and good photographer. So he basically said, I'm going to send a photographer out to you and help you, make your Airbnb look better. And he didn't say that it was him. And what he really wanted to do, so he did that. He took the photographs and he helped them, but he sat with each one. And he found out, he said, tell me how you use the app. And he asked them to, and he just observed. And he did this with 30 people. And he went back like 2 weeks later with his guys and said, guys, we got it all wrong. People aren't using it the way we think they are. Let's make these changes. And I think it's going to make a difference. And it did. And that's when they took off. So that's sort of usually my advice to founders is don't worry about cash in the beginning. Don't run out of cash. Have enough to live, right? So you don't have to, borrow from your parents. I don't care what it is. But do things first, find a problem worth solving and how to solve it in a good way. Then go get money. Say, okay, how much money do we need to then do that? How many people do we need to code or whatever? What systems we need to buy? If you're already a business that's established, then you probably know how much things cost. And then you have to figure out, how much do we really need? I'm now a fan of about a year. I think you should have about a year of cash, working capital. Figure out how much it costs to run your business. If you had zero sales, how much is it? And just have that in the bank. Work as hard as you can to just keep putting that in the bank. Because COVID has made us all stand up and say, "Wow, who knew?"
Yeah.
So that would be mine.
I think it's good piece of advice, and for startups in particular, I think that's great, because it seems like, I mean, you probably know the numbers better than I do. What's the percentage of startups that fail within like 18
It's
months?
all over the map, depending on what you consider failure. But failure to me is if you don't actually generate 2 to 3 times what the original investment was in some sort of value or some sort of liquidation event. My understanding is that's close to 10%. Only 10% of startups do that kind of thing in a reasonable amount of time. 5 to 8 years is sort of that reasonable amount of time. Most of them struggle and suffer. Most businesses struggle and suffer, unfortunately.
Yeah.
The ones that die that you talked about are actually, to me, that would be better, right? Because it's over. But the ones that survive often are struggling on a regular basis. That's huge stress. That stress on your life, stress on your family, probably not healthy for you. I'd rather die and then go work for someone else and relax than be struggling for years and years and years.
Yeah, I didn't sleep at night. I think I mentioned that. So after when it finally just sort of, when I made up my decision that, what, this is dead. The only thing keeping it alive is, giving it my lifeblood,
Exactly.
and it's dead. Things got better almost immediately at that point.
Exactly.
And, it's
stress is created by the stories we tell ourselves, not really anything else.
That's a good phrase to remember.
Yeah. So you told yourself a different story, which was, you know what? I don't need to do this. There's no way this thing will work. I can't figure it out. I can sell it. And it's amazing how that probably everything just sort of washed away in your body. Like, your shoulders dropped, you probably sleep, and who knows, you probably stopped gaining weight or whatever it is that you do. And when we get stressed, there's so many different factors. Yeah.
I've shared this story before. I came to the realization that I was not a good number one. I wasn't positioned correctly, put together correctly to be a number one. And the illustration I've always used is, if you were a Star Trek fan, Captain Picard always had Will Riker, number 2, his executive officer, right?
Yeah, sure.
It just dawned on me, that's actually the job I want, right?
Oh, cool.
That's what I'm good at. I want to be someone's number 2, someone's executive officer. As a small business owner, I remember telling one fellow I worked for, who's still a great friend today, so that you can go on vacation and know that everything will be okay when you get back, right?
Exactly.
I want to take care of you and our business together.
Awesome.
And I think a lot of people, are trying to do things they're not cut out to do. And that's one I've suggested to a lot of my friends who've said, maybe I should start my own business. And I'll tell them, yeah, think again about that. That's it's not for everybody. Absolutely.
It's definitely not for everyone. Yeah.
Well,
so
Bill,
are you familiar with the COO Alliance, Carl?
I have heard of that. Yes.
Yeah. It's an interesting. So it's basically all you guys get together and help each other. So you look into it. Cameron Herold, who is in my book and wrote a book called Vivid Vision, which I really like, runs that. And I think it's a great idea, because there's lots of CEO organizations, but there are very few number 2 organizations.
Yep.
So it's nice, and I think those people are super important, right? The visionary and the integrator are what make the company successful, not one or the other. It's the two combined that make the best stuff, because you need that inherent tension of reaching up and going crazy, but also bringing people back down on the ground and saying, yeah, but we can't do that right now. Here's why.
Yeah, what made it work for me when I finally figured that out and went to work for somebody was the bond of trust that we were able to build together. Was so powerful and so made work so much fun along the way. So, and I've often shared with many of my friends and customers who are owners of small and medium businesses, I've asked them, do you have somebody like that? That you go to work every day and the first thing you do is check in with them. How are you doing? What's happening today? What are we working on? Right.
That's great.
That's what it's all about. Well, Bill, thanks so much. This has been great. And
Sure.
I've enjoyed the conversation, and I know that my listeners will enjoy some of the stories we came across today. And thanks for sharing some good stuff with us, for sure.
My pleasure.
Yeah. And to my audience out there, we'll see you again. Until we do, stay connected.